Most of the problems that we see with Russia is because of American explicit policy. We allow American and Western allies want that oligarch stolen money. We want access to those resources. We don't want to see social democracies developing around the world because then we might have to pay a fair market rate for their products. We want power and control for our capitalists and our people. You'll only be prosecuted if you attack a highly developed country like Ukraine. Ukraine is not highly developed. They're white. Ukraine is the poorest country in Europe. It's one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Ukraine sucks, but they're white. That's the key point. People think highly developed equals white. It don't.
Off London, we're going to see the sites of corruption.
Now, just there, the other side of the road, you'll see a building.
Britain is the world's biggest enabler of financial crime. You know, there is just so much.
Did you hear that, chat? Britain is the world's largest enabler of financial crime. You don't think New York City isn't number 2? You don't think Wall Street is number 1 in the real number 1? I mean, when you combine London and New York City, that's all the world's oligarchs. You could snatch all their ill-gotten gains. Moldova is the poorest country in Europe? True. Good point.
Much of this property
I should have said
by oligarchs.
Western leaning or something like that.
Extraordinary. And we probably only know like a tiny fraction of it as well. The second biggest house in London after Buckingham Palace belongs to a Russian fertilizer tycoon and former member of the upper house of the Russian parliament.
We've found £1.5 billion worth of UK property that's owned by Russians who are either connected to corruption or have close ties to the Kremlin.
If oligarchs want to get away with something, London is a one-stop shop that lets them get away with it.
Roman Abramovich, who's known President Putin for decades. Worth an estimated $12 billion, he owns the London soccer club Chelsea.
They keep that money in the form of property in West London, in super yachts, fine art, football clubs, you name it, they buy it, we sell it to them.
For some time been complaining about the number of homes in our city owned by Russian oligarchs close to Putin.
Surely Mr. Abramovich should no longer be able to own a football club in this country.
In the last few weeks, ever since the invasion of Ukraine, there has been a belated realization in our political class that selling
Wait, you mean there are oligarchs here? What the fuck are you talking about? You go to if you go to the richest neighborhoods in the biggest cities, you'll hear it. You'll hear Russian, you'll hear Chinese, you'll hear oligarch fail sons. You go to Vancouver, they have more Chinese oligarch kids there. You go to Vienna, that's Russian oligarchs walking around. Like, are you fucking kidding me? If you go to Trump Tower, who do you think's buying his garbage apartments?
Of our
Give me a fucking break.
To Russian oligarchs was a bad idea.
London has long been a playground for the wildly rich.
We will continue working through our hit list of oligarchs, focusing on their houses, their yachts, and every aspect of their lives.
We must tackle the oligarchs here and go after their money.
£100 billion is laundered through the City of London every year. We are the world's best butler, and I don't think that gets enough attention.
100 billion. And by the way, all our oligarchs do the same shit. It's just America is a tax haven, so they could do it here at home.
My name is Oliver Bullough. I'm a journalist and the author of Butler to the World. I write about financial crime, kleptocracy, corruption, and how the UK is central to laundering the proceeds of crime all over the world.
You could almost say that it's a criminal country.
So the Russian economy is incredibly unequal. Approximately 500 people, the 500 people around Vladimir Putin, own more wealth than the bottom 99.8% of the population. And uniquely for a major economy, more than half of that wealth is not in Russia, but is owned outside Russia. And when I started researching that, I realized quite quickly that they didn't do it alone. They had help, and their help was from lawyers, accountants, company formation agents.
Oh my god, it's almost like we created Putin so that we could steal Russia's assets. It's almost like it's a fucking plan of the neoliberal scum. And by the way, they're bringing it home. That's our future. They're practicing in Hungary. They're practicing in Poland right now. That's our fucking future.
All the other professional classes in this country. And I don't think that gets enough attention. So
if that
I
were
like
true,
to...
the U.S. would have bought all the Russian companies during shop therapy after the USSR collapse. Now you falsely the thing that you're misunderstanding, Easy Bake Oven, and this is partially because you're still adopting a liberal framework as opposed to a leftist framework, is you think that these U.S. distinctions are actually significant. When what you really should understand it is as a international capitalist class. All right. And what was done to Russia was an neoliberal ideological framework. They wanted to build a domestic capitalist class in Russia. That's what the shock therapy, the shock doctrine was. They went in and they took those Russian state companies and state assets and put those in the hands of Russian oligarchs, who then promised to provide those resources to European markets. That was the plan. Now Putin is a fascist, and so he has tamed his oligarchs, but retained the structure of hierarchy, extreme concentration and hierarchy, because it helps him. It's easier for him to manage as a fascist. But our plan, our ideological plan, was to go in and create that capitalist class and destroy the left wing in Russia, which was successfully done. We achieved our objectives. And Putin was a direct handoff from our hand-pick bagman, Yeltsin. Yeltsin gave power directly to Putin. You don't think the CIA was involved in that? We were openly involved in Yeltsin and supporting and propping up Yeltsin. Can you recommend some good nonfiction? I'm Canadian, so maybe not something super US-centric. I don't know. I have to think about it. The percentage of numbers he mentioned are basically the same as America, except ours is like 800 people. It's not 99.8%. Our wealth is a little bit more down to the top 10, 20%. The U.S. has a lot of upper middle class people that manage the empire, who are the bureaucrats of the global empire, and they make like $500,000 a year. They're like that's part of what we do.
Try and expose our own role in helping Russian oligarchs loot the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to...
How do I tell this stuff to normies? I don't follow politics without sounding insane to them. Well, the thing about when you talk to normies is important not to start off with the conclusion or with a grand narrative. It's if you just go, it's all because there's a secret capitalist class, man, and people are not going to... That's going to sound stupid. But when you talk about something that's small scale, right? Like, for example, the Starbucks union. This is a great point for teaching leftism to people. Why won't they just pay those Amazon workers more money? Why won't they let them go to the bathroom? Why are they doing these weird cult trainings? Why won't they let them form a union? And you can see that class conflict, namely the owners of society, are trying to keep the people that produce value under their control. You can start to educate people and agitate them. It's about underlining that class conflict. And then when you take the accumulation of all those individual anecdotes into a analysis of the structure as a whole. But the first thing you have to do is get people in at the ground floor with normal practical examples that they can understand. Piece by piece. If you just theory dump people, their eyes are going to glaze over. And I think for a lot of leftists, there is a certain kind of when you understand Marxist analysis, when you understand materialist analysis, you start to go, I've cracked the code, and you want to tell everybody about how you crack the code, and you want to feel like you're smart. That is the wrong attitude. The attitude that you should be having is, how can you apply this knowledge in your daily life to organize, educate, inform, and persuade others so that you can create a cohesive class-based movement that can achieve real practical change to improve everybody's quality of life. That's the end of the game. That's the goal. The goal is to create a society where everyone is able to pursue their full potentials, where they live in dignity, where they have sovereignty over their own life. That is the goal. Okay? It's not just I'm smarter than everybody. I have annoying neighbors with thin blue line flags and various Trump flags, and I'll get something that'll bother them a little bit. Any ideas for a flag that I could get? I think it's just a basic hammer and sickle. I'm always a fan of Bernie Sanders stuff or DSA stuff hammer and sickle shit, it's not that it's bad per se. It just seems foreign. Like, the reason why it's the hammer and sickle is because Russia didn't have an industrial proletariat when the Russian Revolution happened. So in order to be more, they changed their movement to be more applicable to the conditions that were on the ground. So they were talking about rural peasants, farmers, serfs, former serfs. So they added the sickle. So the hammer and sickle is kind of like another organizer made something that was for their community. You got to make something that's more applicable to our community. I like the DSA shaking hands over the rose thing. It's not that the hammer and sickle is bad. It's just not tailor made for our material conditions like it was when it was created. Like, that's my personal view on that. The hammer and sickle is based, but it's like a historical thing for a movement that's not our own. So we have to make something that is more applicable to us. That is my view. I did this at a party a couple of nights ago. We got blazed. Is that what we got to the topic of historical and political bullshit? Oh, somehow. So whatever about the crazy bullshit scandals of the Reagan admin, we watched a few vids on the Iran Contra and shit and got them all gas, no breaks. Just softly luring them to anti-Republican, anti-conservative ideology so they could potentially be radicalized later in good times. Yeah, stuff like, I mean, I have a bag of old tricks, like, right? Like, I have the American Dad Iran Contra video. This is something I like to go to, In
the 80s, there was Cold War drama. We fought the commies inside Nicaragua. Our friends were the Contras. Freedom was their mantra, so we sent them lots of money for guns and landmines. But Congress stopped the Contra money flow just because they moved a teeny bit of blow. But then a hero came forth. His name was Oliver North. He and Reagan went around the sissy Congress. Ollie North, Ollie North. You see, North secretly sold missiles to a harmless country called Iran that would always be a grateful ally. Then he gave the profits to the Contras. Genius! But the sales were uncovered by the press. Reagan and North began to stress. Because what they did was technically high treason. But it was totally justified. North volunteered to take the blame to save Reagan from prison rape shame. The truth he did vary with his hot secretary, thanks to her shredder. He got off totally scot-free. Ollie North, he's a soldier and a hero and a novelist, and now he's on Fox News.
Just stuff like that. Little stuff like that is always useful because that gets people interested, It's not about just doing stuff dryly and boringly and being factual, because we all know that just being factual doesn't matter. You have to dress it up. You have to have some elan. It has to have some flair, some entertainment value. The treason and war crime, the daytime talk show pipeline. And by the way, chat, that is about as soft as it gets. If you really look into what the Contras were and why the Congress blocked the funds, why? Because they were murdering babies and shit and then raping American nuns. There were American Catholic nuns who were living in a convent, and the Contras came in and raped them. Okay, so the shit that they were doing was so beyond the pale. So that's why the Congress was like, no, we're not funding this group. They're fucking Nazis. They're fascists. They're murderers. And that's who they sold weapons to Iran with. That's when the CIA blocked the prosecution of various smugglers that were selling cocaine and crack in America. Why? To oppose not some sort of like far left super Stalinist group, but just like Bernie Sanders style lefties. I'm surprised the American Dad writers got away with some of what they did, considering they were on Fox. Yeah. Well, yeah. All right, let's go back. We got interrupted talking about the Putin oligarchs.
Tour of London.
The kleptocracy tours is not my idea. It was my friend Roman Borisovich came up with this idea. It's based on the Hollywood tours. In Hollywood, they'll point out, Charlie Chaplin's house or, Scarlett Johansson's hairdresser. Here we do the same thing in a bus, but we don't point out stars. We point out oligarchs. So that house You know, that duplex apartment with a view over the Thames, that belongs to, you know, Vladimir Putin's former deputy prime minister. Or, you know, this delightful mews house belongs to the son of one of Putin's oldest friends. Or, you know, that penthouse apartment with a delightful view over Hyde Park, that belongs to the richest man in Ukraine. You know, Wittenhurst, the second biggest house in London after Buckingham Palace, belongs to a Russian fertilizer tycoon and former member of the upper house of the Russian parliament. You know, how did that happen? It's amazing.
We helped them steal money.
Dmitry Firtash is a Ukrainian oligarch. He became astonishingly wealthy working with Gazprom, the Russian gas company, to sell gas to Ukraine. That made his company, Rosukrenergo, essentially a vehicle of Russian foreign policy, because the gas price is one of the most important levers that Russia has over its neighbors. If it jacks up the gas price, then their governments have to do what they're told. Dmitry Firtash has essentially acted as a vehicle for Gazprom, the Russian gas company, and therefore Vladimir Putin, to impose his will on the Ukrainians when the Ukrainians have tried to elect governments that have not been Kremlin-friendly in the past.
Russian state gas giant Gazprom sold Firtash gas at well below market prices, which he then sold in Ukraine for large profits. Companies he controlled made more than $3 billion on the arrangement.
This is a man incredibly powerful enough to essentially overcome opposition from the government of his own country. He, having made this very large amount of money from raising the gas price for Ukraine, he brought that money to Britain. I was interested just to try and find out what Mr. Firtash owned in this country, and I turned to every journalist's best friend, the phone book, and typed Firtash into 192.com to see what I could find. And I found an address in Knightsbridge, and I went to have a look at it, and it was a rather disappointing and slightly squalid basement flat, which struck me as odd, because if I were an oligarch, I wouldn't have chosen to live in that flat. I poked around to see if there was anything else around there, walked around to the other side of the block, and realised that this basement flat had essentially been repurposed as the back exit to an absolutely gigantic mansion on the other side of the block. It is an astonishingly lavish property. You can only see half of it because half of it is underground. There was a swimming pool in its second basement. I'm not sure exactly how much it cost, but a property publication estimates about 60 million pounds. He bought himself a place in high society by giving money to Cambridge University that allowed him to meet senior royalty right up to the Duke of Edinburgh. But I think the real crowning glory of his integration to the British establishment came in February 2014 when our government sold him a tube station, which happens to directly adjoin his mansion in Knightsbridge. There is still, and I've been writing about this and thinking about this for a while, something amazing just about the idea that someone can be rich enough to buy a tube station. I don't know of anyone else who owns their own tube station, but Dmitry Firtash has Brompton Road tube station. It's been closed since the 1930s, but it's still got all the platforms, still got the shaft, it's still all there. If you've stolen money, you have a problem, which is that anyone can see that you've got more money than you should have. But in the 20th century, particularly in the second half, we developed this wonderful idea of the shell company. And a shell company is a corporate structure, an investment vehicle. It looks like any other company, but all it does is pretend to be something other than you. So it's a little bit like wearing gloves. It keeps your fingerprints off whatever it is you're holding. Now, if you're being particularly careful, you don't just use one shell company, you use multiple shell companies, because it is possible for the police to find out who own a shell company eventually. It's like wearing gloves and more gloves and more gloves, and every time the police take one pair of gloves off, all they find is another glove. February 2014, he was in Vienna and was arrested.
By the way,
warrant.
this is true of not just Russians or Ukrainians, but how all oligarchs do it, whether they're American, whether they are, Chinese, whether they're Saudi. It's the same fucking game. Steal money by taking the value of, and here's the thing, that here's the important point, in case there's any right wingers in the audience, is these people are not making their money from genius. Okay, they are taking the natural resources of a nation and putting it under their personal ownership because of their relationship with their government and the American government. So what should be the benefit for the entire country, the nation, and this is especially true of America as well, goes to the hands of some guy Instead of this guy owning a tube station, that money should have been used to uplift the people of Ukraine, uplift the people of Russia, to provide them with dignified life, because it was their resources that were extracted. This guy doesn't drill oil. This guy didn't find it. This guy doesn't do work in refining. He doesn't lift a finger. He's an owner. But Mike, I heard from another former streamer, rich people don't move money around to avoid taxes. They're on the straight. No, okay. I mean, Jesus Christ.
It turned out for this whole time that the UK had been enthusiastically selling him anything he wanted to buy. The Americans had been investigating the provenance of his money and became particularly suspicious about a deal he'd made in India to try and corner the country's titanium operations. So he has actually been, ever since, battling extradition from Austria to the United States. It's been 8 years now.
Firtash says he's asked American officials for permission to leave Austria and return to Ukraine, where his industrial plants, he says, have all been transformed into defense production.
I did see that Mr. Firtash asked that if he could go back to Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have, as I understand it, an extradition treaty with the United States, so I could understand why that might be somewhere he'd like to go. I don't think the Austrians are likely to let him leave until the legal proceedings are ended. The Americans certainly, I think, would have a spectacular sense of human failure about that.
Сразу домой не боитесь? Там вроде говорили, что будут экстрадировать вас в США сразу же с порога.
Долго боятся в лес не ходить.
In the last few weeks, ever since the invasion of Ukraine, there has been a belated realization in our political class that selling much of our capital city to Russian oligarchs was a bad idea. So obviously a lot of people have been sanctioned. Roman Abramovich most famously, but also Oleg Deripaska, who's also a very influential and wealthy man, and a lot of other important but not as high profile people. Sadly, attempting to take on these people from a standing start is like attempting to run a marathon when you've spent the last 2 years lying on the sofa.
I am going to hold my words. You're starting off something bad. You are radicalizing us. You are weaponizing our way.
In March 2022, a small group of anarchists briefly occupied a house which was thought to belong to Oleg Deripaska, though he says it belongs to members of his family. I did pop in on the house in Belgrave Square. There were 4 anarchists, as far as I could tell, all of them sitting dangling their feet off the balcony above the front door. And there were certainly 20, if not 25, uniformed officers of the Metropolitan Police, plus special kind of tree climbing unit in helmets with harnesses and a cherry picker. I think the government ministers here in the UK have been quite embarrassed by their failure to respond to this problem in the past. And it did certainly struck me as ironic that so many officers of the law were paying attention to this property now that some anarchists had sat on its balcony.
Yes, because leftists did it. It's more of a threat to this corrupt world system of capitalism that 4 anarchists could seize this property, could squat on it, and be like, look at all this resources that's just sitting here idle, owned by some foreign thief. If too many people see that, they might say, hey, maybe my children can get education. Maybe my children can get health care. Maybe I can take a vacation. That's where all the production of our society goes, and the pockets of these oligarchs, this separate class. So it's more of a threat. Those 4 anarchists are more of a threat than all the stolen money in the fucking world. So yeah, no shit, they're going to put 30 cops on those people. They want to make an example of them. Oh, you raise up, you come out of your station, you go out of the place you're supposed to be. We're going to drop a fucking nuke on you. Does that mean coal barons own Appalachia? Like they took the coal and people? Yeah.
When for decades they hadn't paid any attention to it at all, seems to be representative of our approach to property in this country, that once it's owned, we will defend it with everything we've got, but we don't pay any attention to the money that does the buying in the first place. I think my favourite gimmick is Michael Gove saying that we could house refugees in the properties of oligarchs.
I want to explore an option which would allow us to use the homes and properties of sanctioned individuals for as long as they are sanctioned for humanitarian and other purposes.
You know, it's just a headline. Again, it's just these attempts to grab headlines without recognising that what's really needed is to take tackling kleptocracy as seriously as we take tackling terrorism. So far, I have seen zero sign.
You know what kleptocracy is, chat? It's called capitalism. The entire system. If you tackle kleptocracy, the whole house of cards will fall. That's the name of the game.
The government is prepared to even think about doing what it takes to do that.
No shit.